Being perfect is overrated. Consider this quote. Perfectionism is not the same thing as striving to be your best. Perfectionism is the belief that if we live perfect, look perfect, and act perfect, we can minimize or avoid the pain of blame, judgment, and shame. That's a quote worth knowing from Brené Brown, author of The Gifts of Imperfection. And it's helped me to see myself with greater clarity and compassion. As a recovering perfectionist myself, I now understand how perfectionism, while it can enable someone to achieve, good things, for me, it was this way of dealing and avoiding with the pain of self-doubt and worthlessness that often was lurking in the corners of my heart. And so as I've learned to press into perfectionism and release that, it's been very liberating. So if you're in relationship to a perfectionist, if you've given birth to one, and I think firstborn siblings tend to be perfectionistic, or if you are a perfectionist, I hope you'll give this episode a listen. We're going to unpack what it is and why it can be such a heavy burden to carry. And more importantly, what does it look like to join a growing community of recovering perfectionists who are living with greater freedom, courage, and connection? Welcome to The Work Within, where we have conversations about mental health and faith to help you live with greater connection and wholeness in your everyday life. The Work Within is a podcast of the Watershed Initiative, supporting the mental health needs of the local church. Thanks for listening. So welcome to The Work Within. My name is John Lynn. I'm your host. And today I'm joined by Laura Harrison and Paul McMullen. Both are licensed therapists, great people who have done battle with their own inner perfectionist, I presume, and have helped lots of other people to also do battle with their perfectionists. So Paul, Laura, it's great to see y'all. How are you guys doing today?
You too. Doing good.
Hey, John. Hey, Laura.
Well, before we jump into our conversation, two quick invitations. First, would you show us some love by leaving us a rating, a review, or subscribing to this podcast? And second, if you would like help finding a faith-based therapist, we would love to serve you. Just reach out and we can help. All right, let's get into this conversation. So, Laura, Paul, I was just curious, what does perfectionism look like in your life? Or what has it looked like?
It was funny because I call myself a procrastinating perfectionist. That I tend to put things off because I don't think I can do it perfectly. And my husband will call me a 99%er. I will finish a project all the way up to the last 99%. Like I will paint a room and get it all completely done, but I won't put the trim back on. Right? It's like then I have to call it finished. And what if it's not quite right? So there's things that I do that battle against that, but my perfectionism tends to look like not quite finishing things most of the time because it's finished and it's supposed to be perfect. But if it's not quite finished, then you're still not there yet. So
that's very logical.
Maybe.
How about you, Paul?
Yeah, mine is, it's probably more connected to the jobs that I've had, the careers that I've had. And so currently as a counselor, as a LPC, and previously as a pastor at a church. And so the perfectionist is, it takes more of a form of looking like I have it together. And sometimes it's just because of the title that I carry. And it's almost like I feel like to have the title, I need to portray that I'm living up to the title. Or, people look at pastors as people that should have high moral standards, and they should, and counselors as well. And so I think what happens is I know my own heart and mind, and I know the good, bad, and ugly, and then I feel the tension of, my people look at me in this particular role, and so I feel the inner tension of that, and it might push me to hide or act like things are better than they actually are sometimes instead of being vulnerable. So that's a different type of perfectionism that's almost like role-based perfectionism.
Yeah. I resonate a lot with that, Paul, as well. I've also been in a lot of ministry settings as a pastor in different roles. And that idea of portraying a perfect image definitely hits home. And I was thinking when you were talking about that, how, I think at some point I also learned that vulnerability was a virtue and being authentic was a virtue. And so in my perfectionism, I would learn how to share just enough vulnerability where it was seen as a value and like, oh, wow, John's being so authentic or vulnerable, but not enough to really be vulnerable or authentic, And so it was more about managing that image of perfectionism, like even in my character rather than, truly being authentic. So that's good.
Yeah. When you're talking about that, when you guys are talking about that, it occurred to me like there's almost like two forms of perfectionism, like the way that you want people to see you and the way you see yourself. Because I'm pretty good at like saying, "Oh yeah, I mess that up all the time." I'm not, and not that I don't often worry about what people think about me, but I tend to be more hard on myself. I think this is a little bit. We haven't talked about Enneagram much on this podcast, but a lot more about my Enneagram number. That I'm more self-critical than I am critical of others, and I also don't want people to be self-critical. So I tend to I would fall on my sword and say, "Well, yeah, I do that too," to help them to feel more heard and seen. Whereas in my mind, I may be more self-critical of myself. I'm going to judge. My perfectionism is more internal rather than external, worried about what other people might think of me. Right? Does that make sense?
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Both of them are harmful.
Or they can sap us of a lot of energy. I'm mindful of the fact that for me, a lot of times perfectionism has kept me from taking risks because the fear of failure feels so overwhelming. Because if I don't do it just right, or if I don't do it perfectly, that feels almost like existential. Not just like, oh, I tried and I messed up, or I failed at that, big deal. But it's like this weight of, well, I'm tied to that. And so what does that mean about who I am and my worth, right? And so that's another way I see perfectionism come out. And so, yeah, earlier I said, I made the phrase, I said, being perfect is overrated. So I want to unpack that a little bit because there is a difference, I would argue, or is there a difference? Maybe that's what we can unpack between striving for excellence, striving to be your best, striving to be perfect, and perfectionism. So what's the difference? How are they the same? How are they different? That difference between striving to be your best and perfectionism.
The word striving, actually, it triggers something in me.
Yeah.
So I think the idea of striving feels like it gets in the same ballpark as perfectionism, and that may just be me and not for everybody. Now I say that, and then I had a goal in my run this morning to get under a particular time, and I was striving for that. And so I do strive for things without, and I don't think it's being perfect. I just like it's a marker of a goal that I want to hit. So I don't think that my issue with the word is congruent with being perfect. But when I think about that question outside of the word striving, I just thought about the people that I have met in the recovery world, in the recovery programs that I've participated in and gotten to know people in. And I find that the people that have been doing recovery work for a long time to be the healthiest people I know. And yet the fact that I'm meeting them in recovery implies that none of us are perfect, or we wouldn't be in a recovery program. But to me, the willingness to stick with that and to do the hard work and to believe that you value that you're either able or valuable enough to put in that work and create a better version of yourself, to me implies like there's a humble, growth oriented, I'm going to stick to it, that I've seen in those people, that I think portrays that really well. And but the fact that you're doing it in a recovery setting kind of cancels out the perfectionist part, because you wouldn't be there otherwise.
I think it's how you internalize that phrase, striving to be your best, like Paul was saying, because I work with a lot of teenagers, and oftentimes their parents will say, "Hey, just do your best. Just do your best at school." And you will see that taken in very different ways. Like, you will see a teenager specifically that I work with, will see that as like the expectation is to be the best, not to do the best, right? And so the interpretation of that can be taken very literally, or it can be taken like, okay, I'll just do my best. It feels like it's supposed to be a releasing thing, like, just do your best. As long as we know you're doing your best, then we'll be okay with that. But that internalization of like, what does my best look like? And when do I know that I've reached my best? That can be different for every person and how they see it. And so I think that they can be blended. And I think it just depends on how you approach it, how your personality approach it. So I think it's much more of an internal lens that you see that through than anything else.
And I think it also gets at like, what is that best mean to me or mean to a person, right? It's like that interpretation or value that's assigned to achieving one's best. Is it because I feel joy and as I do and live into my strengths, or is it because I'm trying to I think Brené Brown also uses this phrase of hustling for attention or affirmation in what I achieve. And that feels a little bit different. I think that touches upon that whole idea of perfectionism as avoiding the pain of shame or condemnation or judgment. So to build on that, she writes that perfectionism is not self-improvement. Perfectionism is at its core about trying to earn approval and acceptance. So let's maybe sit with that a little bit. If we were to go a little bit underneath the hood, lift up the hood of a car of someone who is really working really hard, striving really hard, which in itself is not a bad thing, right? But when we attach perfectionism to them, what are some of the common themes that you see underneath that are driving those behaviors or that effort or that relentless pursuit of trying to be better, trying to improve oneself or the situation around them, or making sure the paint on the wall is just perfect before you put the trim back, right? Like, what's driving that is different than maybe just doing that because you enjoy that or you care about it?
Laura, would you be willing to tell us your Enneagram number?
Oh, it's a 1. I'm a 1.
It's a 1. Okay.
Yeah. I'm a 1.
Because your question, John, made me think of the difference, and this is part of what I think Laura was alluding to earlier, of the motivation. Is it intrinsic to myself and my own? And, part of what I'll want to answer to your question is this idea of the inner critic, which we've had an episode on.
Yeah. But which is actually our most listened to episode of all the episodes we've done. Yeah.
Okay.
So somehow that resonates with a lot of people.
Yeah. And we all have some form of inner critic. But the Enneagram 3, not that this is a Enneagram episode, but they are more striving, I think, for the approval of others, to look good in other people's sight. And so there might be different motivations for the perfection in somebody's heart.
Yeah. And I think that's an important context to look at, because it is a lot about motivation. What are your core values and what is important to you? Yeah. So like for me, one of the things is like doing my best and doing it right is extremely important to me. Yeah. Right. And so when I can't do it right, I would be more likely to abandon it than to finish it, because it can't be right. And so I've got to quit, But if someone else went in and finished it, I'd be like, oh, great, I'm so glad it's done. Right. And so there's a difference, that little bit of tipping. But I think that when you look at what is the core motivation, a lot of times what you'll see is that people are looking for that acceptance. They're looking for someone, either themselves, self-acceptance, or external acceptance, for someone to say, oh, I see you're doing it right. Okay. And so that can be really hard when you don't feel like you can meet up to that standard.
Yeah. Ironically, go ahead, Paul. Yeah, go ahead.
I was going to say the language that you just used, Laura, reminds me of some of the frameworks that I learned when I was at the Townsend Institute. It's being good with being with one's performance or doing things perfectly. Like I am only good if I do it at this level. And the shift that they say looks like growth in somebody's life is moving from I'm the good self, as in this is what it takes for me to be good, to the loved self, which means this is what it looks like in my relationships, that I'm loved, that it's not about whether I've performed this right or not. The most important thing about me is that I'm loved. And we could dig into that more, but I think that's what it made me think of when you said that.
Yeah. Yeah, that starting place is so different. So, full disclosure, I've taken the Enneagram test a few times, and my highest scores are 3 and 1. So, 1 being, really driven by perfectionism, doing things right, and 3, I think, trying to be perfect for the sake of what other people might think of me. So it's like double dose. And so I've had to work really hard to find what is the center, what is the grounding place that allows me to release some of that and show up from a place of actually, yeah. And I think, Paul, in your words, to show up from a place of being loved, I am enough as I am before I enter into this task or work. So, Laura, that's funny because my bias would be if I start something, I will not just stop it. I will keep going hell or high water until it's done just right, and sacrifice a lot of other things that are important to me, right? Family, time, and self-care, right? Because I'm just like, I need to get this done and get it done just right.
And so you can see how that shows up differently, even with the same motivation, right?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
And I think that's interesting. Although I would urge you to dig deeper on your Enneagram because you can't be a 3 and a 1. One or the other.
That's what they say. That's what they say,
Might be 2.
That's right.
Maybe you're a 2 with really strong wings. Who knows?
We need to do an Enneagram podcast.
And I would say, go back and listen to that inner critic episode, because we talked about exploring where that critic comes from, what it sounds like in your life, and both the idea that it can be problematic and that it could be trying to help you do something, but just in a very domineering sort of way. And so I do think learning to integrate your inner critic, rather than it being the dominant force that drives you, is a core skill that all of us, to some degree, whatever Enneagram number we are, have to figure out how to do.
Yeah. I think another thing is really important to notice. What I see a lot of times in individuals when they came from a very disorganized household, and especially if they had a very fractured relationship with one parent, especially if that parent was an addict, you will oftentimes see that child swing, and into adulthood swing, either far toward perfectionism or far toward dysregulation. And when they swing far toward perfectionism, it's normally about proving that parent wrong. Like looking at that parent who had the addiction or rejected them for some reason, or didn't show up for them the way they wanted to, and saying, okay, I'm not going to be like them. I'm going to prove them wrong. I'm going to prove that I can do better. And it becomes a driving force in their life to prove the parent wrong. And so noticing that, and if that's you, noticing that, like, hey, that's a normal pattern that happens with people who have a dysregulated parent, and learning that you created that as a safety net for yourself. I've probably said it before, and I'll probably say it again, that all behavior is self-protective, right? You are looking for a way to protect yourself from becoming like that parent. And so perfectionism is a way you can do that. So notice, look at what happened in your life that caused you to see that as the way to fix it. If I am perfect, I'm not going to be what?
And that just underscores the fact that there's a story attached to the perfectionism. And so I'm so glad you said that, Laura. This notion that it's a coping mechanism, it's a way to address pain and to find healing in the midst of some really hard things, whether that was rejection or living with a parent who was an addict. And so not that it's not to say that the perfectionism is fine and dandy, but to have, like we've said so many times, compassion on yourself. Like, oh, well, no wonder you use perfectionism as a way to feel safe in the world. I used perfectionism as a way to feel safe in the world. Because I think, yeah, the tendency to be like, dang it, I hate my perfectionist. I just wished I didn't have that. And my perfectionist sucks. And to condemn ourselves, which only makes it worse, right? But if we can,
you're trying to be the perfect non-perfectionist.
Exactly. Which is what is that, oxymoron, right?
Yep.
Yeah, that's really good. Well, I thought it'd be helpful to unpack for a lot of our listeners do come from faith backgrounds or go to church, and that is its own cultural vortex, isn't it? Because I think many of us who are Christian or identify with a certain religious faith, we know in like scriptures, for example, there's this tension. We hear Jesus say things like, this is in the New King James Version, which is what I first heard, be ye perfect as your heavenly Father is perfect. And I remember when I first heard that as a kid, I was like, damn, that's like a high standard to measure up to, and I just felt like, who's going to do that? And then, that's Jesus saying that. And then there's texts where, it says that like, he who knew no sin became sin for us, that we might become the righteousness of God. And so this beautiful image of the exchange, right? Like God in his infinite love took our imperfection upon himself and gave us his perfection. And so there's this beautiful truth that, actually, you are not perfect. And that's why God has given us Christ. And so I think that's a tension that we often feel. And I'd be curious, like, how do y'all make sense of that tension? This call to, grow, or a call to live into or pursue this goal of Christ-likeness or higher ethics or your true self, however you frame that ideal, and then the reality that, man, God just accepts us as we are. Full stop. Yeah. So how do y'all make sense of that?
And there's tension because you'll feel churches will feel different about how they culturally respond to those questions. You got your grace-filled churches, and then you got your stricter, got to do it right churches, and lots in between. Some churches that don't seem to care at all. And I do feel kind of like nerding out on theology in this question, but I remember studying about the kingdom of God when I was in seminary, and talking about what they would call it, the already but not yet nature of the kingdom of God. That in Jesus, the kingdom of God is showing up, it's breaking into the world, but it's not fully realized until he comes back. And so the same thing happening on an individual level, that God is at work in me. I have been made new. My identity is new. Ephesians 1 says we're seated with Christ already in the heavenlies. But then very clearly, like, we are being made new. We need to keep being filled with the Spirit. And one of the verses that I feel like speaks to both sides of this really well, it's in 1 John chapter 1. And he's like, I'm writing you this letter so that you won't sin. But, if any of you does sin, we have an advocate. And if you pretend that you don't sin, you're lying and you're making him out to be a liar. So walk in the light and admit that you've sinned, and then his blood will keep purifying you over and over again. And so there's a lot there in that, but he's basically saying, and what I would say is I think the Bible takes both of those things very seriously, that it's like staying in our brokenness and sin is not something that the Bible ever promotes, but also it very much promotes, like, Jesus has dealt with sin and is dealing with that, and that if you, like, there is grace to keep experiencing over and over again. And when people go in a different direction, God, that the story of the prodigal son is right there. He's waiting, ready to run out to them when they come back. And so those are a few things that I think of in the biblical picture.
Yeah, I thought very similarly. I was very fortunate to have a time in my life where I could do BSF, which is actually I don't need Bible fellowships. I don't know what
Bible
it's
study
called.
fellowship. Yeah.
I was like,
Bible study
what?
fellowship. Yeah.
I just knew it was BSF. I don't know what it stands for. Anyway, did that for quite a long period of time when my kids were little, and that was one of the major takeaways I had from BSF was that concept of God outside of time and seeing us as completely renewed in Christ, regardless of where we are in time, and how that was really kind of freeing. So as much as I struggle and when I fall, God already sees that through a light of my completed self because I've accepted him. And so there's that whole that's a little bit freeing, but it's also a little bit like challenging too, because it's like that doesn't mean I can just go do whatever I want to do. But when I do stumble and when I do fall, and I could just do whatever I want to do, but that doesn't necessarily honor my relationship, right? And so looking at that through like when you said the tension of this, that's where the tension comes. It's like I could do whatever I want to do because I've accepted Christ, but then how does that impact my relationship with Christ, and what does that relationship really look like? And so there's all that about how do you then make that perfection, but we can't make that perfection, but we're always striving for it because we were made to be perfect, but then we lost that perfect. So it's that whole little conundrum that happens in your head, and you can spend years trying to resolve that, or you can just say, you know what, I'm never really going to fully understand it, and it's okay that I don't, but I have to trust in faith that this is what God has provided for me to make it right. And that's a tough one.
Yeah. And I think the whole notion that, and this is what I feel increasingly convinced, like getting someone to change out of guilt or coercion, right, or shaming them, it might yield some immediate results, but the long-term fruit of that is always short-lived because it's not coming from within. They're afraid of something.
And it builds resentment.
It builds resentment. That's right.
Mm-hmm.
But when there's a secure attachment, a secure relationship where you're like, man, this person loves me, I am good. And out of that, now I just want to please you. I just want to live my life in a way that is more reflective of the relationship that we have. I just really believe that is the starting point of the relationship with God that we are meant to have. Somehow along the line it gets distorted, and it's like, yeah, you've been accepted. Now go earn. Now spend the rest of your life trying to earn that acceptance that you were given as a gift, which doesn't make any sense. But the more that we can embrace this idea that, wow, like I'm already fully embraced, and Christ now walks with me towards this goal, this fuller life, this truer life has been very transforming for me. So yeah, can y'all speak on how do you go about loosening the grip of perfectionism on your heart, on your mind, and your life?
I'm going to say something that I feel like I say on most episodes too. So I'm with you, Laura, that I'm going to keep repeating myself, but I think we need to experience vulnerability and grace and acceptance with other people. I think that we need to be able to take those places that our inner critic is calling us out in, sometimes very harshly, and be able to share vulnerably, and then also hear what other people are struggling with, and it removes the facade of I'm the only one that's doing this. It removes the facade of or the fear of if people knew that this was my reality, they would leave me, they would reject me. So I really feel like you need to experience that, and having a safe group of people is very important in that regard. And there are people that, like, you also need people that will go there themselves. So sometimes you might be in a group. I was thinking of a particular group I was in where it was only like one or two people that would be very vulnerable, and everybody else would share stuff that felt kind of surfacey. And it destroyed the desire in me to be vulnerable. It was like one person that, that was kind of in a leadership role would share, something like, I forgot to hold open the door when I went into the mall for the old lady, like that was their worst sin of the week or whatever. And I'm like, I don't want to share, like, oh my goodness, are you serious? Yeah. And it's not that people need to go make up stuff, but again, the people that have been really going deep with, I feel like deep with God and in their story and in their walk, they delve into their heart in a way that even if it's not, what's going on in them doesn't look as bad, but the level that they get to in their heart makes you feel like, oh, they understand what it's like to struggle. And there's just a difference. So again, it's not just like everybody struggles with the same level of things in their perfectionism, but you want to find people that are safe and vulnerable, that will give and receive grace, and that will go to the same depth that you are in sharing. I think that's just so powerful. It does so many different things.
Yeah. I think it's really hard when you do feel like you're alone in it. And a big part of what therapy does is it helps you to normalize. I loved having I had a mom friend when my kids were little. I have one of my children. I have three, so I'm not going to say which one, who tended to do things very outside of the box. And so we would often have to, like, she also had one like that as well. And so we'd often call each other and say, "Is this normal?" Right? He just did this. Is this normal? Oh yeah, mine did that too, or mine did something very similar. And so having people that you can check in with and saying, "Hey, this just happened in my life," and then being able to normalize it for you and having those safe relationships really does help to, like, bring some of that down. And that connection with people that have seen you fail and love you anyway and will walk beside you and walk through that with you. And that's why community, again, is so important, and building community, so that you can have people that will hold you accountable when they see you straying off the path or being a little bit too stringent to the path, right? And I think with Christian community, we have to be careful because it's so easy to fall in a workspace. It's so easy to say, well, if we don't volunteer, if we don't show up in this way, if we don't put in all these hours to be Christian, that we're not doing it good enough, right? And so to allowing yourself, like, being in relationship with Jesus is enough. That's all it takes. If you did nothing else, that's all it takes. And so allowing yourself to know, like, there isn't perfectionism that we need to achieve. It's already been achieved for us, and we kind of just have to wait.
I like what you said too about it's in those moments of failure, experiencing someone seeing that and saying, "Hey, you're good, man. Like, I'm still right here," rather than like, like, how could you mess that up? I mean, that experience, and that's something I've experienced and been on the receiving end, has been so powerful, right? That is Christ's presence made concrete, made infleshed, when someone can offer that to another individual who is wrestling with perfectionism, blunders or fails, and experiences that, am I still okay? Like, actually, I felt like the world was going to crumble, but actually I'm still here. And I feel like I'm still here because you're here with me, giving me strength. And I think probably our drumbeat would be to say that can happen, that needs to happen both in the community at large, in our churches, in those spaces, and sometimes for a period with a therapist, right, who can do that a little more surgically or in a focused way. But the end goal is still the same, is to be connected and to know that we are okay, even in the midst of our mistakes and flaws and failures. Yeah. Is there anything you'd want to say, like, to folks that are in relationship to a perfectionist? I guess maybe we just touched upon that a little bit, but any tips for folks who are like, yeah, I have a child who's this way, or my spouse or friend is a perfectionist? Like, what are ways that as a friend or parent you can care well for the perfectionists in your lives?
I think that a lot of times, I think it depends on if it's inwardly or outwardly focused. If they're trying to make you be perfect as well, that's a different relationship, right? That's a different pivot. But if they are hard on themselves because they are not perfect enough or trying to present as perfect all the time, then I think having a lot of compassion for that person, because they're already beating themselves up more than you will ever beat them up. And so really showing up with compassion. If it's someone who's trying to put on, like, oftentimes you'll hear, like, my father wanted the perfect family, so we had to blah, 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 right? Or my mother or whoever. Moms get bashed on a lot, so we'll bash on dads a little bit. But when that is the case, then having really good boundaries and separating yourself from that, going, this is a problem that they have, it's not a problem that I have. And really looking for the truth in that. And that's really hard to do, especially if you're in a subordinate position to that person, if you're a child in that relationship. And really, you don't have the skills to do that until you get older, and then you have to go back and do that work. But I think that's the hard pivot to make, is when it's someone who is trying to force you to be perfect as well, so that they can feel satisfied within themselves that they have created something that is perfect.
Yeah, that's good, Laura. I think being explicit about your acceptance in the relationship, regardless of what the person does, and the person won't believe you, and you have to keep doing it over and over and saying, no, I'm here still. I still love you. I still care for you. And you're helping them develop a new neural pathway. That's one way to think of it. You're digging a ditch in somebody's in somebody's neural pathways where these experiences can go down a new pathway that feels different. And it takes time, and it takes multiple experiences.
Yeah, and it's generational. So a lot of times you're handed this, right? Whether it's you're rebelling against someone who was super imperfect, or you were in that family that said we have to be perfect, you're handed this through generations. So what Paul said about building new neural pathways, so very important. Your brain develops a road and how you're supposed to react and what you're supposed to do. And you have to give it, you have to start developing exit ramps for it. You have to say, but there's a possibility it could go this way. It's a possibility it could go this way. If you just say, no, that's not right, your brain's going to say, yes, it is. That's what we've always done. But if you say, well, maybe it could be over here just a little bit. Maybe there's a road adjacent that we might be able to take that doesn't take us so far away from what we believe is true, but just push us right over here. And then that's easier for the brain to accept.
That's good. Well, I see that we're pretty much out of time, so I'm going to wrap this up here. And I'll end on a quote from Henri Nouwen, who wrote this in The Life of the Beloved. Over the years, I've come to realize that the greatest trap in our life is not success, popularity, or power, but self-rejection. Self-rejection is the greatest enemy of the spiritual life because it contradicts the sacred voice that calls us the beloved. Being the beloved constitutes the core truth of our existence. So, yeah, if you take nothing else from this conversation, whether you're a recovering perfectionist, just realizing you are a perfectionist, married to one, raising one, realize that being the beloved is the core truth of our existence. And it's from that place that we can begin to live into greater freedom, maybe loosen the grip of perfectionism on our lives and those around us. So, Paul, thank you for joining us today. I know Laura had to jump off, but as always, we want to end with this blessing. May God bless you and strengthen you as you do the work. Thank you. Thanks for tuning in to The Work Within. We hope this show blessed you in some way. Please subscribe and leave us a review. Your support means a lot to us. Finally, if you're looking for a therapist, We'd love to help. Visit us at www.watershedinitiative.com to get started. For a limited time, new clients can receive 10% off their first 5 sessions of therapy by mentioning The Work Within. Join us again next time.